Okay, so the last video I posted was, I put the title, The Assumption of the Thinker. So I wanted to talk about how pretty much what is realized when we talk about the awakening thing is obvious to itself. Is self-confirming, self-evident, self-obvious, self-validating, such that it's not doubtable. It's not something that can be doubted. It's undoubtable. Because the thoughts that and beliefs that would generate the doubt are appearances that appear within and as part of what is realized. So what is realized is so hard to talk about, but it almost doesn't need to be talked about. But what can be done is the obstructions, that which is making it look a kind of way that it is not, a kind of way that leads to misunderstanding or suffering or dissatisfaction and so on. Like the reason we're all here, these obstructions can be looked at, investigated, such that we realize what's not here. And what's not here in its reality is basically a set of assumptions, and assumptions that have grown in their reality and their belief and their energetic felt realness, fundamentalness as the way reality is. It's a bunch of assumptions, and these assumptions are felt assumptions. They're taken as the way things are because maybe we learned that, or we've been reinforcing through practice that, and eventually we forget what is realized, and what is realized is something that really feels like remembering something obvious, and that's why I think awakening is a good term. So the assumptions are initially, these are just assumed over and over again, and they're not looked at closely, investigated closely, until we start to take up an investigation of direct experience, until we actually look and see what's going on. And that's why I describe the realization as simple and easy, because it's the obstructions that make it seem complex, that make it the assumption that we are the one who's practicing, that we are the thinker, the practicer, the one who's going to attain something in the future, that is continued to be assumed, even as we begin the investigation into the nature of experience and self. And we assume that from that position, it's always a viewpoint, a position, we assume that this is something I am doing, this is something I'm going to get for me, and it's not this already, it's something else already. Or we assume this identity of the seeker, the one who is not awake, the one who is trying to wake up, and in doing that is missed consistently, because approaching life from that assumption of the thinker, the me, the subject, and in that is assumed an objective reality, an objective attainment called awakening, enlightenment. So we make a thing of it, we make a something else of it, and then we, from that position of the assumed me, we chase that to try and realise something else, something that's not this. So in a way, it seems, people have got annoyed at me for saying this, it seems absurd that from a point of view, it seems absurd that this whole thing, this premise of this channel, because it is as though I'm talking about something else. It's as though I'm talking about some fantastic special thing that's not already here, that's not already this, that will be discovered elsewhere in a different version of reality in the future by the subject. And it's, when I see people ask questions and stuff like that, again, it's absurd. It would be even more absurd if there was a very strong belief that there's a person here who can answer the questions, who has something valuable to say, because it's just not like that. What I see, let's say, is a mystery, the mystery of life, pristine awakeness, perfect enlightenment, masquerading, pretending to be a person who has a question about why it's not awakeness. And it's just, from one point of view it seems absurd, but another point of view, that assumption feels very real. It feels like the only version of reality. It feels like reality. So the initial assumption is that I am the thinker. I think thoughts. I struggle with thoughts. I struggle with these thoughts. I mean, if we don't know thoughts are thoughts, if we believe them to be real reality, like worrying about the future to the extent that I really believe in it, thinking about identity to the extent that I very much believe in that these thoughts are real, then to that person is probably not going to be watching this video. The initial obstruction, the initial assumption is that I am the thinker and I'm in control of my thoughts, and these thoughts refer to something real. Even the thoughts about enlightenment. The enlightenment is something real, and it's not here. It's not this, and it is a thing. So in the assumption of the subject, an objective reality is assumed, and it's assumed to be as real as the subject that perceives it. So me and my thoughts separate from them, me and my experience separate from them, me thinking thoughts about myself that I'm in control of and I can change because I struggle with them, me thinking thoughts about my life as that relates to me, that is entirely real. The initial assumption is that I assume I'm the thinker. The thinker is real. I am real. What I think about, my thoughts about the past, the future, my worries, my joys and my attainments and so on is real. Those thoughts all are tangible and refer to a real objective reality. Again, I may be mapping this a little bit, but I would describe it this way, is that something becomes clear, something is remembered to be a more fundamental, more infinite, intimate nature of reality, and in that nature of reality it includes the subject and the object, the thinker and the thoughts. So it's seen that the subject co-arises with an objective thought about something. When the reality of the thinker is reified by the reality of the what's being thought about, and they appear as one thought now, as a kind of modulation of the mystery, a modulation of awakeness, awareness, consciousness, aliveness, mind. When those definitions soften, then it's possible to then relax the subject and the objective world it's thinking about. And the position that it's relaxed into is not a position, it's very paradoxical, but it's self-obvious, it's self-confirming, it's beyond the worries and the conceptual reality of the thinker and the thoughts. So there's some rest that is gained there in that remembering. And it's not like I remember something. You can maybe describe it as reality remembers itself. Something's aware of itself. You hear people say awareness of awareness, or awareness without an object or the need for a subject. Like unformed awakeness, unformed awareness, unformed substance of experience or thought. Once that's been realised, that let's say once that's realised itself, it does away with the notion of me as a subject attaining something called awakening in the future, and it kind of becomes clear that this is a backwards process, a process of subtraction, a process of letting go, of relinquishment or release of the contracted focus on me trying to get something from a position of the one who relates to my experience. Seeing that the one who relates to experience isn't separate from the experience. The one who thinks isn't separate from thoughts. In fact, they're made of the same substance. It seems to be realised largely in the space of thought. When we become more interested in what a thought is, it then begins to expose these assumptions that when we're looking from that position, that assumed reality is assumed, believed at a deep level to be real. When the reality of that and belief is broken, then this process of coming apart starts, of relaxing the focus of the assumption. And as that focus relaxes, something else comes into focus, and that's direct experience, the immediate experience of what's here, including thought. But as the thoughts calm down, we start to see that the thought world of the subject, these assumptions that are bleed out from this internal world in here, and there are no limits or definitions regarding me in here, my thoughts, this thought entity, and the entirety of the sensory experience. So then the sensory experience becomes more intimate, more close, more not out there. And then the next set of assumptions are not so defined in terms of like thought narrative, but are kind of like spatial assumptions of separateness of what this is. I assume I am in here. I've never looked, but I'm looking out from here, and I assume I am as an entity in here, and this world out there is separate from me, and it's full of all these things that I know what they are. And there's comfort in the known, but then we start to really look and question experience. It's then obvious that the answer isn't a an objective thought from a subjective position. The answer is already present. What's realised as that initial belief obstruction is released is that there's this unknowable certainty about this that's infinitely present here and is doesn't need to be attained, is inherent. What's making it look like something that needs to be attained by a separate me is assumptions, beliefs about time and separateness, about what I am and my thoughts about my awakening and so on. So the assumptions would be something like, I'm in here, I'm looking out. For me, they were I'm looking out this window at an outside world, and I'm a separate thing moving through this outside world, separate from it, in it, living in it. Not as it, but just as something separate moving about in it. And I'm looking at a world of familiar objects, at a distance from what I am. So like I mentioned before, I look at other people's faces, I see their eyes, their face stop here, so I assume I stop there too. I just impute that onto the experience as an assumption. I see different things that I have learned are objects, like there's a bunch of cars in this car park, a lamppost, shopping centre, a sky is over there, some trees, and I assume that they are inherently separate and they are inherently at a distance from me. They are inherently not me, or I am inherently separate from my environment. And then we kind of look for the evidence of that and see what is making it look like anything is separate. What is making it look like I'm in here? So then I see that this window that I'm looking at, this borderline between me and the world, simply isn't there. Simply doesn't exist. I see that what I believed were inherently existing separate objects aren't ever separate, are never perceived that way, can never be perceived separately. I see that there isn't then an outside world. We could maybe say that this aliveness, awareness, whatever you'd like to call it, that you could say was realised, the simplicity of existence that was realised initially is then noticed in the senses, and that the senses don't have limits in regards to that. So what I thought was, I am aware of something over there from here that's inherently separate from me. I see that it isn't separate. You could say that it is unified by the awakeness, the awareness. The awareness, if we can call it that, doesn't know distance. What I'm aware of over there is aware of itself through me, and then it's aware of itself without the need for a me. You see that there isn't a direct experience of distance in my experience, as in that there is a spatial paradox here that's untouchable really by the mind, because the mind is making it look like there are separate things out there separate from a me in here, but when those assumptions are relaxed, something mysterious presents itself in the senses, and something infinitely beautiful and inherently liberating, just the experience, without the boundaries, without the limitations of all the assumptions, segregating and separating everything up into parts and things with their unique values, a hierarchy of implied values, including myself. So it's not clear where the sound is, but the sound is self-confirming. The sound is just the sound. It doesn't need to be figured out. There was an assumption that I was going to figure something out about this, and that it doesn't need to be done. It's much more of a relaxing or a letting go. Now, it's not clear if, that white car over there is over there or over here. It's not clear if it has real dimensions or boundaries or anything like that, but the experience itself is definite, is certain. So again, it doesn't need to be figured out. And then I realised that what I was looking at and assuming to be lamppost, sky, bird, tree is an infinitely more fascinating and beautiful intimate experience than what it was assumed to be before. I see that there's no real outside. You could say that everything is inside. So everything becomes closer, everything becomes more absorbed into the felt sense of oneness. The ongoing experience of the absence of limitations and boundaries solidifies what was realised initially into something much more tangible, much more accessible, and much more constantly immediate. So that place of rest that was glimpsed in the initial awakening then becomes always everything. And in that always everything, there's a great relaxation that dwarfs all the problems of the assumed thinker, the assumed separate subject, the assumed me. I see that the boundaries of this physical body are also assumed. There's clearly no separation in the scene. There's clearly no position here that I reside in separate from all that. That's just not here, spatially. It's clear that obviously there are no things at the ultimate level. Obviously this is non-dual, this is oneness. But even the assumed boundaries of this physical body in the sensation are augmented onto the experience through these thought assumptions that are practiced and built up over time. They become assumed and felt, really energetically deeply felt, to just be the way it is. So this investigation then dissolves, disintegrates the physical, visceral, felt experience of separation in every moment, infinitely right now. And in that, the reality of this assumed me, this assumed character, that with all my problems relating to past, future, present, my life and me separate from it, they just start to fade away. That doesn't mean, even at this deeper stage, that doesn't mean that there aren't pathological behaviours. That doesn't mean that there aren't emotions that need to be felt because they've been avoided with these separations of assumptions all this time. That doesn't mean that the character is then going to become perfect. All of that is then exposed as a fiction for the purpose, let's say, of embodying the implications of this realisation, and then that's something that takes a lifetime, I assume. So looking for these assumptions, and they're assumptions that are felt. They're not cognitive things. Initially they might be that you think about and but they're deeply felt assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of self, the nature of me. And at the core of that is that I am separate, I am not complete. I'm not comfortable with the not knowing, and I need to adopt all these beliefs. I need to fortify this identity so that I can feel okay enough to get by. The fundamental questions, the existential questions, are consistently ignored by these assumptions, are actively avoided by this automatic pattern of self, because it's scary, because, you know, that constructed fictional character can't handle a reality that it can't box in objectively. You know, it has a primal fear of experience, viscerally, immediately, physically, that we generate this character separate from everything, that can pretend that it can control everything, that can pretend it's in control enough so that it doesn't have to feel things that it doesn't want to feel. And eventually that illusion of agency as a separate thing, as a me relating to something separate called my life, something separate called the world, that agency then doesn't make sense anymore. And in that, there's a greater relaxation into the mystery, and a forgetting about that pattern of avoidance, because there's such an intimate and deep connection with the visceral experiences of life, including all of the pain, all of the discomfort, all of the emotions. We see that these emotions are avoided, labeled good or bad, the different qualities and flavours of emotional experience, as whatever this is, this human, are avoided because some of them are deemed unpalatable. But it turns out that the most painful emotional experiences, the visceral physical experience of that, the most profoundly painful ones, are the most beautiful. The likes of death, love, stuff like that. You know, there's a great avoidance of these inevitable aspects of experience. But the beauty and the wisdom in those emotions is one of the most incredible and mysterious and profound aspects of experience. It engulfs the entire experience to the extent that these assumptions, these patterns about why I need to avoid this, why I don't want to feel this, lose meaning anymore, because the experience is all there is. The experience is what matters. There's no should or shouldn't anymore. There's just the experience. And the closer and closer we get to not grasping or averting from experience, but getting close to life, getting, let's say, absorbed into these experiences fully as possible, the more we see that they're fleeting, the more we see that they're impermanent and subject to change, ungraspable, mysterious, not controllable. And in that mess, in that impossible mystery, there's freedom. And it's not in getting something to control how I feel, it's in the opposite. It's about feeling to forget that one that needs to get. Was that a sentence? I don't know. So again, it just becomes about experience. But it's all masked by these assumptions. And you see that these assumptions pop up in their strong belief when we are avoiding feeling something. And there's an aversion or overthinking or grasping or something when we're avoiding feeling, especially emotion, avoiding feeling. So a lot of this is just to feel as much as possible. And those avoidance patterns become irrelevant because they're not needed. Because you could almost say that the experience is savoured, the emotion is savoured, is sought out, but not with in a grasping sense. That painful, uncomfortable emotion, just go directly into it until that's all there is. And savour it as much as possible. Become so interested in it, you're like, I can't wait the next time I feel grief. It's maybe a bit controversial to say that, but because then I can feel the beauty and the wisdom in that fully. And when that's fully felt, really fully felt, not avoided, that pattern is done away with. It might take repetition, but you don't need the pattern anymore. You don't need the complex behavioural thinking thing that's only in place to stop us experiencing, to try and separate from experience, control it so that I can not have this experience and then have this one instead, the one that I like. That just never happened. That never happened. It was all an illusion that was added to, that was augmented onto experience after or on top of the what's already there, including the emotion. Anyway, I'm gonna have to go now, but so my point on this was the assumptions. What is being assumed? What is thought? What is making it look like this isn't already enlightenment, this isn't already liberation, this needs to be controlled by attaining something? And look for those assumptions, and the assumptions are felt, and they're almost immediate sometimes. The aversion, the pattern of behaviour that's there to avoid that, it just appears as soon as there's an inkling of the possibility of experiencing something uncomfortable. Is there anything separate in experience? Is there a me in experience? Is there anything but experience? And where and what am I assuming myself to be in that? Apart from that? Anyway, I'll talk to you next time.